Okay, in this video we're going to be going over the very basics of animation and then getting you started with your first animation. So the first thing, we just have an open scene in Modo, blank, nothing in it. By default you're going to start on this model tab up here. So what we want to do is get to the animation tab. So to get to that, obviously we have this little guy right here called animate, but depending on your settings, if I click on this little gray window, it closes so you don't see that anymore. So if you don't see that, you can just click kind of in between right here. It pops up, you can hit animation. Alternatively, if you hold Control and tilde, that's the button if you're using a Mac under your escape key, it brings up this little menu. So this has all of your little submenus for the most frequently used ones. So we're just going to go to this one, animate. And yet another way of doing it is all the way up here at the top, layouts, and we'd want to go to the animate tab right here. So one thing, if you have an animation tab that is kind of out of whack, you might have customized it, did something crazy. If you just double click on the tab up here, it's going to say, do you want to reset everything? You can hit OK. Alternatively, you can do layout and then restore right here, and that's going to reset all your settings as well. Before we do that real quick though, what I'm going to do is just throw something in the scene that we can animate. So what I'm going to do is just throw a sphere down, so left click on the sphere, you have all your properties over here, it's just set to the default 0.5 millimeter with 24 sides and 12 segments. It's set to a globe, but the thing that we want to do is the polygon type, so if I open this up a little bit more, polygon type is set to subdivs. We don't want that, we want it set to faces, so we can just hit this tab right here to face, right click, and now we have the ball in our scene, hit spacebar or escape, it'll drop that tool. Alternatively, if the ball comes in and it's already subdivided, you can just hit the tab key and that'll turn that subdivision on and off. And then down here you can just see one more time, its current try count is at about 8,000, a little over that. If I hit tab, it drops it down to 528. So ideally we want to keep that unsubdivided while we're animating, because again, if you have a slow computer and you're trying to animate almost whatever 20 times as many sides, it's just going to take longer for your animation to go through. So again, going back over to this animate tab, you can see that stuff kind of changes a bit. So going back to our model tab real quick, again over here you have all your properties with your meshes, your cameras, properties over here, modeling tools over here. Conversely, going over to the animate tab, both of those windows are now gone. We have a really big window, but then down here you'll see a bunch of new tools you might not be familiar with. But this scene doesn't have any animation in it, so what I'm going to do is just grab a separate scene that does have animation just for the time being. So now if we look, we have a little character in the scene. Again, the setup down here is this little bar up top is going to be your time slider. So that's going to be, just like in 2D animation, your keyframes in order going until the end of their animation. So again, this one starts at key 0, goes all the way to key 44, and then it stops. Down here we have our play buttons, playback buttons. So if I go ahead and just hit play, what it's going to do is play this animation. So again, this is just a really simple idle, and what it does is it plays through all these keys and then just restarts at frame 0. So this in total has her kind of breathe in, breathe out, and then start over again. So again, if this keeps looping, it's just going to have the animation keep looping as well. Pretty normal when it comes to animation. The other thing you can do as far as scrubbing goes is I can click in this timeline, left click and drag. So I can, depending on how fast or slow I drag this, it'll have the animation play as fast or as slow as I want it to be. So this is just a really good way to check your animation, make sure everything looks good, especially if there's like a particular spot where there might be some snapping or something weird. You can just look at that one small particular area. The other thing you can do is go down right here and click on this little guy right here. So if you hover over it, it's called the time tool. And how this works is you have this little gear right here. So this is going to be my auto play range. So what it's going to do is pretty much whatever keyframe you're currently at, it'll play the 5 frames after, because we have it set to 5 frames, and then the 5 frames before. So if I go to frame, oops, hit OK on that. Go to frame 20, it's going to play up until frame 25 and then start back over again. Back here 5 frames and then repeat. So to activate this play, you just middle click in the viewport, and now it's playing those handful of frames over and over again, so you can just see a small portion of the animation over and over again. Alternatively, I could bump this up, and this frame's 44 to 0, so let's do 22, bump it up to that. Now if I hold the middle click, it should go all the way to the end of the animation, and then go all the way back to the beginning and play all the way through. So again, the real purpose of this is if you have potentially a problem spot, you can say I want this area give or take 10 frames, and it'll just play that and loop over and over again. So closing the time slider, the next thing I want to show you guys is this little settings button down here. So if I open this up, it's going to give my scene start, which this one's set to 0, and the end is set to 144, and then it has current start and current end, which are both currently set to 144. And then down here are some other tools like frame rate. You can change that actively. And this is something you don't have to set in the very beginning of the scene. I could come in here, change it to 60 frames a second, change it to 30 frames a second, whatever, and nothing's going to really break. So we'll just leave it at the default at 24. But our scene start, if we wanted to add on to this animation, so after she's doing this idle, I want to make her attack or something like that, we're going to need some more keyframes. So the scene itself only has 44 frames. So if I come in here and let's bump this up to 100, hit enter, now the scene itself has 100 frames in it, but the current start and end time is still set to 0 and 44. So when I play this animation, it's going to go to frame 44 and then start back over again. So to see the rest of these frames that I just created, I can change this current start and end time. So let's increase this up to 100. So now as soon as she gets to frame 44, she's going to stop. And it's going to play frames 45 all the way to 100. Obviously she doesn't animate in those frames. We could do whatever we wanted with her. And continue animating. An alternative way to change our frame length, instead of going to the settings menu all the time, if you look, stop this animation real quick, if we look under this time slider, we have this little bar right here. So again, right down here it says 100. So what I can do is take this bar right here, go over to the right hand side, grab this little square, and I can drag this. So this is changing the frame range that we want to animate to, so I can change this back down to 44. Now you can see over here our last key is going to be frame 44, but you can also grab the middle of it and slide the entire thing. So now we're changing our start time. So let's move this all the way over here. So it ends on 100. We want it to start on frame 45, so right here. So now we just have a big blank section where she's not moving at all, because again, after frame 44, she stops moving. So this is just one big chunk of frames where she's not doing anything. So we could reanimate her doing an attack, doing a jump, doing whatever we wanted at this point. So pausing this animation, what I'm going to do is jump back to our other frame. Let's just go ahead and close this one out. We won't need it anymore. So looking back at our ball animation, again, this guy, if I hit play, nothing's going to happen because there's no keys set up. Another thing that you might notice that might be a little bit annoying is the camera and lights in this scene. So these are just items that I could click on. I could technically delete these if I wanted to, but if I want to hide these, what I can do is just hit the O key, go to visibility, and right here we got these little checkboxes called lights and cameras. I can click those to turn them off. Alternatively, if you don't like hotkeys, there's this little gear right here. Click on him. Same scenario. Turn off show lights, turn off show cameras, and then we're ready to go with animating this guy. Again, you don't need to turn those off. Some people, they just get in the way. You might accidentally click on one. So that's just something to do to kind of help your scene out a little bit better. If you are animating the camera though, that might be something you'd want to leave on. It just depends. Ideally, you can also animate lights as well. But for this scene, we're just going to be animating just the ball. I'm going to go ahead and turn the grid off real quick so we can see just this scene. So one other thing I want to touch on about setting keys and animating before I get into this is, go back to this tab, it's a little bit easier to see, is when you're animating stuff, I'm not going to be actually animating polygons moving left and right. What we're going to be doing is animating this whole mesh object. So ideally you'd want to click on items up here, click this entire item, and this guy by himself we'd be moving left, right, wherever. So again, just a reminder, you have to have this in item mode to set keys. So again, this is already set to item mode. What we're going to do is start setting keys. So there's a handful of ways you can do that. So one of the easy ways to do it, we're going to actually have his first keyframe scenario be a movement, and we're going to move him on the x-axis, which is this little red guy right here. So let's start him at frame 0. So I want him to have a keyframe on the x set. So what I'm going to do is over here we have move, rotate, and scale, and then you have x, y, and z, and then again every one of these has 3 values, so we have 9 values total. Again, by default all these should be set to 0 except for your scale, because again if he was at 0% he'd be infinitely small, so again he'd just be at 100%. So again, if I wanted to do a quick animation, I can just hit this little button right here. What it's going to do is set a key. So over here you see this little white guy appear. I'm going to move up to frame 20, move him over to the right. As soon as I let go of that movement, what's going to happen is it's going to automatically set a key there that's called auto key. It's on by default in Modo. If you wanted to turn it off and manually set all your keys, over here you have this little guy called animated. You set him to off. We're going to leave it on for this purpose. And then what I'm going to do is I want to have my ball return back to this spot that he originated in on keyframe 40. So again, at 20 after that it's not moving anymore, so he's just going to stay in the same spot. So what I can do is either move him all the way back to where he was. Ideally I'm not going to know exactly where that is, so I can look down here and see that he got moved over 2.9 meters to the right. So what I could do is have him go back to 0, hit enter, it goes in that way. So now let's look at this animation wise. I hit play, he goes over to the right, goes over to the left, and then stops. So an alternative way of doing that, so let's just undo a few times where that key disappears right there. The other thing we can do is copy and paste keyframes. So to do that, what I can do is just click and drag. I have this key selected, Control C for copy, go over to the frame that I want, Control V for paste, and now this frame and this frame is going to be in the same spot. So again, hit play, he goes over to the right, goes over to the left, and then stops. So the other thing I want to do is this movement so far is kind of quick, so I'm going to slow it down a little bit. So to do that, to slow it down, what we're going to do is this is the entire length of our animation. I'm just going to extend this out a little bit. So instead of this going from frame 0 to 20 to 40, we're going to click this frame and just move it over to frame 60. Click this frame, move it over to frame 30. So now again the same animation, it's just going to be happening a little bit slower. So moves to the right, moves to the left, and then stops. I'm just going to restart in a clean scene. I want to have 2 different meshes here. So let's do a cube and a sphere so we can tell them apart. Throw both of these in the scene. I held the shift key down when I clicked both of these, so they're in 2 separate mesh items. Let's go ahead and delete out this empty mesh. We're not going to need him. And the sphere, I'm just going to move it outside of the cube so we can see both of these at the same time. Let's pop back over to the Animate tab. So one thing that might be kind of confusing is selecting either of these. If you're in item mode, which is the hotkey of its 5, you can click on either of these and start animating them. If you'd rather be able to see the meshes, there's this little button down here that changes the interface, and it's going to bring up this menu for us so we can select these guys and see what they're named. So let's go ahead and have these 2 move away from each other. So that's the W key to have move, hit S on frame 0, go to frame 20, pull the sphere away from the cube, go ahead and make sure that plays out fine. Do the same thing with the cube, give it a frame at 0, give it a frame at 20, and make sure everything works fine. So aside from movement, you can actually scale and rotate and have those animate as well. So let's go ahead and scale up the ball as it moves away and rotate the cube as it moves away. Select the ball, go to frame 0. Now we hit the R key, so it's on scale. Again, move, scale, and rotate. If you don't like the hotkeys, you can click these 3 buttons down here. So again, we want to scale the scaps. We're just using this one. Let's hit S to set a keyframe at 0, go out to 20. Let's scale this ball up. So let's see how that plays out. Ball's scaling up as desired. Let's go ahead and click on the cube. We're going to rotate him out. So we can click this little rotate widget or hit R. Hit S. That's going to set that keyframe. Go out to frame 20. Rotate him a little bit. Let's rotate him 180 degrees. So I want that to be an exact value. So over here in the Z-axis, because that's where I'm rotating him, set this guy to 180. Hit enter. And that should set that. So just hit the space bar to drop my rotate widget. Now let's see. So the ball is scaling up and the cube is rolling across the screen as intended. So now let's actually go ahead and clear this scene out real quick. It's like we're starting from scratch, and let's actually get a cube and a cylinder. Let's actually have them in the same mesh, so I just have one mesh. I'm sorry, a cube and a sphere. So we'll just name this cube sphere. Go ahead and delete this one. Go to our animate tab. So now if I go to move these guys, it's going to move them both as one item, because again, they're in one container. So when I move the item, it moves both sub-items in a sense. So now there's really not a good way to set a keyframe on just this guy. I can't animate just the polygons and then move him out, do any type of keyframe. If I hit the set key down here, you can see it's not doing anything. Same with this, I can grab this guy's vertices, hit the set key, and nothing happens down here. But again, if I'm in item mode, it's grabbing both of them. I can hit the set key, oops, turn move on, hit the set key, move over a couple keyframes, move this on some axes, and it'll animate both of these at the same time. Because again, it's seeing both of these little sub-objects in the same container over here. Because for the intro class, the only thing I'm going to show you guys is animating kind of one container at a time. If there was multiple things happening, there's a few different ways I could handle getting these to move away from each other if they're in the same mesh. Ideally, for our demonstration, we're just going to keep these guys separate if we want to move them separate, keep them together if we want to move them at the same time. So one final time, let's clean out this scene. And what I want you guys to do for an assignment is I want you to have 4 primitive shapes. It could really be anything as long as they're different meshes. And have them kind of rotate around in a square. Have them kind of go back to the beginning and then have that kind of loop. So if you kept playing it, that all 4 shapes would just keep rotating. So just a quick demo setup of this. Let's hold the shift key and get a box, a sphere, a cylinder, and a cone. So I could use the grid to kind of see where my 4 points are, but what I'm actually going to do is just throw down a plane, scale that up, because again, now I don't have to worry about matching up grid lines perfectly. Scale this up a little bit more. And now I have all these shapes. This empty mesh we can clear out. And again, the plane is just going to be our floor. That's not going to be one that animates. I'll probably delete it afterwards. Let's jump over to the Animate tab. And what I want to do is get all of these shapes into place before I start animating this. So again, the plane can sit where it's at. The cone, let's bring him up. And again, we want to make sure that he's kind of just sitting on top of this plane. Doesn't have to be perfect. Call that good. Grab the cylinder, move him over, move him up. Same thing with the box. Same thing with the sphere. And again, I don't want to get too much into snapping at all, but technically if you turn snapping on, your move widget is going to default to the center of the object, so you could technically snap to this vertice right here and have these kind of perfectly shaped. The other thing I want to do is if I go to the top again, it's hard to see the cylinder here and the cube here. So what I'm going to do is just throw quick materials on these guys. Let's go to the cone. Call this red. Pick a red color. Hit OK. Call this one blue. Do the same thing. Call this green. I'm just going to go with primary colors here. And this sphere can be yellow. Again, this isn't 100% needed by any means. It's just going to make it so it's easier to see these on a plane, and it's going to be a little bit more entertaining to watch. And again, one thing to note is I'm moving these guys, all of my primitive shapes, in item mode. So again, when I click on it, it's going to have a yellow wireframe. Because one thing that might kind of be weird is if I move this guy if I move his polygons, so he was sitting right here, I move him over here. Now if I click on him in item mode, hit the move key, it's going to remember where his center is. Again, I'm not going to go over centers and pivots in this video, but ideally what you want to do is make sure you're always moving these 4 shapes when you do this assignment in item mode. Otherwise you're going to get your centers screwed up and it's going to be harder to work with. So let's just undo that a few times. And ideally, instead of trying to reset your centers or anything, since these are all primitive shapes, you'd be better off if you did move these in polygon mode on accident. It would just be easier and faster to just delete the shape and make a new one from world center. It's going to reset its pivot point and then just grab it in item mode and then do the animation that way. So again, what I want to do from here is just grab him, and let's say that we're going to move these counterclockwise. So he's going to move up, he's going to move left, he's going to move down, he's going to move over. Again, that's what I want you to do for like a bare minimum on this. Let's go ahead, hit W, S to set a key, go to frame, let's do 25, move him up, go to frame 50, move him over, just going to do these one at a time. Frame 75, he's going to be there. Frame 100, he's going to go pretty much right back home. Again, this isn't perfect. If I click on this 0, you can see that it's off by a little bit. If I want to make sure that this is perfect, I can again Control C to copy that frame, go to frame 100, paste, and now he's actually going to go right back to where he was. And then again, time sliderize, we have it set to 120 frames. So let's knock our scene down to 100 frames total, so there's not any lack of animation, any dead spaces. So again, if I hit play, our ball is going to be moving in a kind of weird roundabout way. I'm not going to go into curves at all, but this is okay for this demonstration. So from here, we're going to do the same thing. This frame, go over frame 25, move him left, go to frame 50, move him down, 75, move him to the right, and 100, we'll just do a quick copy paste. So minimum, I want you to have these guys kind of rotating, but if you want, you can have them scale up and scale down. If you want to mess with curves, it's not anything I'm going to go over in the intro class, but you can definitely feel free to experiment with those. a little bit more advanced stuff, but if you set your curves to linear, what it's going to do is, oops, put that on 45, we want it on 50. If you set your frames or your curves to linear, what it's going to do is have these guys move in a more square fashion. But again, not anything to worry about unless you're a little bit more interested in the animation stuff. So again, frame 0, key, and let's just a little bit of a trick. Instead of copying and pasting this frame, on frame 0 we're going to set a key at his little home position. Now I'm just going to, before he gets any more movement, I'm just going to scroll all the way over to frame 100 and set a key. Now he starts and ends in the exact same spot, so now I just need to do these kind of in-betweens. So right here, 25, 50, can move him up here, and again it's going to do this animation back and forth. 75, he's going to need to be up in this corner. So without any scaling or anything, let's play this and see what happens. So again, because of the curves, again, I'll go over those in a more advanced class, it's going to make the animation look a little bit goofy, but realistically, as long as they're moving in some sort of a counterclockwise or clockwise fashion, whichever you choose, that's going to be good enough for this assignment. Again, feel free to play with rotating with this, potentially try to make the ball bounce, kind of have fun with this, but again, bare minimum, I want something like this where the handful of shapes are just rotating around on the screen. So as far as turning this in, I want kind of two things to happen. One, I'm going to want your 3D file. So in order to do that, if you're using the Steam version, if you just save out a Modo file, so if you just do File, Save, and then your little default, do a Save As so it brings it up. So your little default Modo scene, I won't be able to open that because again, it's unique to your Steam version, so I can't open it. So you're going to have to save it out in a type of file format that I can open, just like the other files. So do File, Save As, and go down here and you'll have fewer options, and you'll want to do Autodesk FBX. If it gives you the option between 2013 and 15, choose 2013. But your other option is going to be an OBJ. So OBJ isn't going to save out any animation information, but a FBX will, so that's why we're going to stick with the FBX file format. So again, File, Save As, choose FBX, name it Ball Bounce, with your name on it like in the documentation. Cancel on this. The other thing I want you to do, and this is just so you can get in the habit of being able to present yourself in multiple ways, is we want to save out a video of this. So again, we haven't covered a ton of stuff on rendering. Ideally, if we wanted to, we could set up the perfect lighting setup, use a bunch of dynamic cameras that are maybe moving around, but realistically, we just want to have it to where I can open up a document that shows your little animation of your guys rotating. So Modo gives you a really cool way of doing that doesn't require any render settings or lighting or anything. So pretty much whatever you see in your viewport is what's going to be rendered out. So again, when I plan this, this little scenario is going to be what's rendering. And to perform this operation, you just want to, in the background anywhere of this 3D viewport, you want to right click, and then down at the bottom it says Record OpenGL to Movie. So let's click on that. Now it's going to bring up the normal save window. So this is going to be what is the name of the movie that we're going to save out, and then what's the file format. So we'll just name this Ball Bounce underscore my name. And then the file format you can just leave to default. It gives you a handful of options, but the default one's just fine. So when we save this out, again, it's going to be just saving to the desktop. So now it's just going to take the time to render out. Again, depending on the length of this, it's either going to be shorter or longer. Again, the more stuff you have in the scene, the harder it's going to take to process. But again, as soon as this video is done rendering, it's going to pop up here. So again, we have ball bounce underscore my name.movie, and I can play this. Plays through one cycle. Other thing you'll notice is down here it says what frame it's on. So at any time I can pause this is frame 20. I can scrub through here, kind of look at these frames one at a time. So again, if you were going to do an animation, send it to a client, something like this, You could save this out, send it to them. It has the frames on here. They could give you feedback at frame 42, 43, for example. The red cone comes off the plane. We don't want that. They can send you those corrections real quick. You know exactly what frame they're talking about. It just helps out quite a bit. So again, I want you to save out the FBX, put it up in your folder, save out this file, put this movie up in the folder as well, and then you should be good to go for this assignment.